This is Podco Media Networks.
It's the Innovation Podcast with Mark Reed Edwards and Garnett Harriman. Let's start the show.
Hi, it's Mark. This week we continue our chat with Ryan Merkley of Creative Commons. Since our interview, Ryan has moved on to Wikimedia. I told him we'll definitely have him back on to discuss that. But in this second part of our discussion, we look at the tight restrictions of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act a little bit. We cover the ins and outs of the music business, what it's like to manage a widely dispersed organization that has no central office, and a community that operates in 70 countries. Plus, we talk about the future of Creative Commons. So let's get back to the discussion. Where are you on the DMCA? What's the Creative Commons stance on the Digital Millennium Copyright Act?
Which part of it are you interested in?
Well, I'm just interested in how tight the restrictions are, and we're talking about music, and the DMCA really changed the way online music works. It just kind of ruined some fun for hobbyists, even, right? And it just seemed to kind of put a wet blanket on what was kind of a vibrant, developing music scene, for want of a better term, that was developing in the early part of this century.
You know, I think there's a couple of things that stick out for me. First of all, the DMCA certainly wasn't, and you're not suggesting it is, but certainly wasn't the beginning of the constrictions on creators, especially on musicians. You know, as we saw, court challenges around sampling really damage and in some cases really destroy what was becoming a wonderful remix culture in rap music. And you listen to some of the records that came out pre-sampling rulings and then watch what was able to be done later. We got this very different culture of remix where, you know, most songs rotated around one sample instead of songs being built around hundreds and hundreds of tiny samples massively remixed and reimagined. I would have loved to have seen what the world would have looked like if that had been allowed to continue, and the way that we could have had true mashup culture and these sort of imperceptible remixes of things that had been truly turned into things that were nothing like they'd originally been intended to be. So there was this one piece which was around the constriction of just straight up use. And then the other piece, I think, which was so damaging was the kind of entrenchment of digital rights management and things that get in the way of the user's ability to unlock content that in most cases they have 100% legal right to use.
Yeah.
And so this was a giant leap in the direction of the user never really owning their music anymore. And moving to this place where now we're seeing XYZ service shuts down and I'm sorry, all your books are gone.
Right. That was Microsoft recently, right?
Yep. And we hate to be the ones to tell you, but you never owned those books in the first place.
Right.
It's frustrating when it's your personal collection. It's insidious when it's your educational resources, when you are, you know, going to school and you're paying for your books and then your books evaporate after your term is over or a couple of years in because the license agreements that at the time seemed like they were being presented to you in order to save you money were actually there in a way that allowed the publishers to essentially take back your books and denying students access to knowledge. I think, you know, that was a pretty pivotal point of this entrenchment of an idea that content was no longer a thing that belonged to users. It was a thing that was occasionally shown to them and then taken away. And so I don't own my music anymore and I don't own my books anymore. And if I don't own it, I can't really hold it. And if I can't hold it, I'll never make anything new with it. The sad part about that is the loss of that kind of serendipity of creativity that comes from operating without having to ask permission and being able to make new things. That was, I think, the beauty of Creative Commons and the brilliance of its founders was the idea of creating a permissive culture where you could create without having to ask permission because those permissions were immediately available to you at whatever time of day or night or place you were.
It's interesting. It's fun having something like Apple Music because there's some music you can discover, but it kind of makes me uneasy that if I discontinue the subscription, I lose that music. And I was in my basement the other day and I saw a few of the records from my vinyl collection, and it kind of made me nostalgic. I don't even have a record player now, but just having the physical copy of something kind of made me nostalgic for the days when that was a thing.
I had this almost the same conversation with my wife about 2 weeks ago. We're trying to clean out the basement. As a homeowner, you have a basement full of junk. That's how that works. Yep. And I have at least 5 boxes of CDs down there. And lots of it is really great independent Canadian music that I collected as a younger person from artists, some of whom I knew and none of whom have their work on Spotify.
Right.
And I thought, I'd really like to listen to that. Do I even own a device that will play a CD right now? And there is one old Mac in the house that will. This idea that if Spotify goes under, and certainly it has no profitability model yet, if it goes away, all the things I listen to vanish again.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
I use the slot in my car for the CD player to hold a holder for my iPhone. So it's useful for that.
Right. Great. Oh, you just reminded me. I have a CD player in my car.
Yeah, just go and sit in your driveway and
That's
listen
perfect.
to your music.
I can run a cable from my car into the house and I can listen to.
Oh, that's funny. But it's not funny. It's kind of tragic in a way, isn't it? The expression of artists in music is now something that is behind a paywall rather than something that you can go down to the corner store and buy and bring home and enjoy and look at the artwork and all that. Mm-hmm. I think that's what's behind the vinyl resurgence is not the quality. Everybody says it sounds so good, and maybe it sounds different. I don't know that it sounds better, but there's a tactile part of it that we miss when we're just listening to earbuds on our iPhone or Android device.
I think that's true. I also, one of the things that has been a downstream effect that is really starting to appear in sharp relief is the disconnection between the creators and the listeners, to stay in the music space, and especially the disconnect between listeners who feel like they pay for music and artists who feel like they don't get paid for music.
Yeah.
And
if you follow David Crosby on Twitter, he's constantly talking about the fact that artists just don't get paid.
I mean, they really don't, and not in the way they ever used to. The highest grossing artists in music are consistently those who tour, because that's where they're making their money. And the ones who make the most when they tour are the ones who are now sort of vertically integrated and own the tour bus company and the communication structure and the merch structure and the trucking company, and they buy all that stuff. And that's how it's
the Grateful Dead model.
Yeah. And it's, for years it was the Grateful Dead and then the Dave Matthews Band and then Phish. And it's, it's people who play 300 plus dates a year who can make real money. But the idea that I buy your record and you get paid something is, less and less true. There's an artist here in Canada, Danny Michel, who wrote a piece in one of the Vancouver papers about, he's a well-known artist. He's does lots of session work. He's had hit records and has been in, signed to labels and been indie as well. And, he tells a story how this year he's, at one point he had a top 10 Canadian record, which normally would be good for him and mean he'd be selling some albums. And this year he'd made $43 on it from streaming. And for him, that meant not only, some worries about his own livelihood, but the number one impact was that he couldn't afford to tour with a full band anymore. And, that's, the downstream effects of that are obviously being felt. And so then it starts to say who gets to be an artist and, what are the opportunities for them. What's frustrating is that I think users or listeners want to support artists. And, all things being equal, I think we still pay a lot for music. I pay my monthly subscription to Spotify, and I probably all in a year spend more on music. If I think of my subscription to Spotify as paying for music every month, probably pay about the same or more than I used to when I bought albums. It's $14 a month for Spotify, and it's was about the same for a CD once upon a time, or for an album before the prices started to drop. But Both the same, but the artists are getting way less today than they used to. And if you look at the prospectus that Spotify published when they did their IPO, they don't make money, they don't become profitable unless they pay artists less.
Yeah.
And the deals that they did with the labels in order to get out of the gates with what felt like a complete catalog of popular music are structured in a way that they don't make more money when they get more users. They just pay more money. And so the only way that they're able to become profitable is if they can find a way to pay artists less, which is, the same story of Uber, which is the only way they become profitable if they figure out how to pay drivers less.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's not sustainable over time if the people who make the thing get paid less and less the more you sell of it.
One part of this that is actually good is a lot of these artists are continuing to tour that may have retired. So, up your way, Gordon Lightfoot does like 100 dates a year still, and he's in his 70s.
Yeah. I mean, one side of that coin is good for him. And the other side is I'm glad that he can, still make his mortgage.
Yeah, right. So anyway, it's a fascinating area talking about copyright. One of the interesting things I remember from when I saw you speak at Flex, I guess a couple months ago, is that you run a geographically dispersed organization. And
that's right.
How challenging is that to manage, and how do you keep your culture thriving and everyone engaged in your mission?
So for context, Creative Commons is a US-based nonprofit with an international staff. There's about 25 of us around the world. We have staff in 8 time zones, in Canada, in the US, in Brazil, Chile, and Kenya. The organization is fully distributed, so there's no central office. I'm based in Toronto, and our staff are all over. We also work with an international community that operates in over 70 countries. In a sort of volunteer chapter model. And so we work with them regularly. We coordinate that work primarily online. My daily work is done primarily in video calls, and we use chat applications and shared co-collaborative documents in order to do most of our work. So there are huge upsides, and there are absolutely big frictions that come with that model of working. The upside is I get to hire the best people wherever they are, right, and I get to keep them as they move, as life takes them where it may take them. And so, for example, I have an employee who was living in the Bay Area, and their partner got a job in the Midwest, working in what was a pretty great job opportunity. And in another environment, that would have meant that I would have lost my employee because they would have left the Bay Area office. In this case, we filed a little paperwork in order to do the state rules properly, and they didn't even miss a day of work.
Yeah.
And the ability to do that is really valuable for an organization where retention is really expensive, or the replacing employees is really expensive. But it also means that I don't have to hire in the most expensive centers. So for Creative Commons, that has historically been seen as an organization that works in Silicon Valley, and we do with all of those tech companies. It's incredibly hard for us to hire in that space because we don't have stock options and bonuses and all of those other things, but we want great talent. And so that's a real tension. And a lot of the orgs that work in this space feel that way. Certainly Wikipedia struggles with that. I know Mozilla struggles with that in order to hire the best and most talented folks, but know that some of those folks are going to have to take significant pay cuts and can be really, highly mobile because they live in an environment of constant offers and growth. The Valley is a strange little bubble of unreality. So being able to hire people in Cleveland and Iowa and Vancouver makes a big difference for us because I can get great folks who are kind of want to live somewhere else.
So what does the future look like for Creative Commons? What are your hopes and dreams for it?
The first phase of Creative Commons was figuring out if we could build this thing, this idea of a simple standard where people could share easily and eliminate that friction that stood between every creator and their creative idea. And I think largely we've done that. The licenses are, seen as a global standard. They're used by governments and nonprofits and individuals all over the world every day and in the billions. And so that's an amazing accomplishment. And I think the org did really, really important work there. The vision, though, was always about maximizing creativity and access, equity, and innovation. And a big collection of stuff doesn't on its own get you there. And so the next question was, how do we do that? How do we actually light up that commons and make it available to everyone in a way that they can use and reuse and realize that potential? And so the next phase of our work, which we started a few years ago, has been about that idea of a vibrant, usable commons and inciting collaboration and building a culture of gratitude. So one of the big projects we've taken on is called CC Search. The idea is a front door to the commons, a complete catalog of every openly licensed work and its location on the web, both CC licensed works and also works that are online in the public domain, and some tools to make it easier to reuse those things. So one of the places where we know, and I mentioned this earlier, where we know that the users struggle is around doing proper attribution. And so with CC Search, we have automated and single-click attribution to make it easier for people to just click and do the right thing. And we know if we break down that friction, we can help people do the things that they want to do easier and faster. And so that's been a real kind of key or sort of marquee project for us is trying to see how we can light up the commons with tools and programs that engage creators and build more knowledge and more creativity in a more equitable world.
Well, this has been great, Ryan. I really appreciate you joining us. A lot of things to think about and keep track of with Creative Commons. Really appreciate you joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
Thanks for joining Garnett and Mark on the Innovation Podcast. Visit theinnovationpodcast.co to subscribe and listen to other episodes.